Upon the release of Ninja Theory's self-published breakout hit, Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice, last year, the conversation surrounding the game was primarily centered on its treatment of difficult subject matter. Through distressing imagery, binaural sound design, and even level creation and puzzle solving, writer-director Tamim Antoniades sought to explore the burdensome symptoms of severe mental illness, which for some might be considered a taboo topic. Much of the discussion was focused on whether the game accurately captures the experiences of those who suffer with psychosis, or whether its hyper-focus on accuracy overcame its self-proclaimed intention to help neurotypical players understand the true experience of those who live with these symptoms every day. While conversations like these are significant and interesting, for me it sits a little wide of the mark when it comes to the game's true message, which is applicable to anyone who plays, whether you suffer from mental illness or not.
No!
Grief. Profound, deep, agonizing grief is something not many of us will escape this life without becoming intimately familiar with. And art, at its very core, is so often about sharing those kinds of personal experiences through the use of allegory, abstraction, and fantasy in order to create visceral fiction that affects the soul and builds empathy while inspiring the audience to glean something and apply it in their own lives. Terrible grief is something so many of us understand too well, and what each of us seeks to learn to overcome and effectively live with. Hellblade is a work of fiction, a fantasy story which makes full use of allegorical tools to show the one and only way to find real healing from such heart-rending loss and anguish: acceptance. The Kubler-Ross model, popularly known as the 5 stages of grief, while largely misunderstood by laymen and even criticized for its lack of empiricism, still gives a decent starting point to understanding the human psyche when dealing with terrible loss. While individuals may not experience these in order or may even skip certain stages altogether, in my own life, I've seen the debilitating effects of denial when carried on for extended periods of time. Of course, denial is an absolutely natural and normal part of the grieving process and can even be healthy, according to numerous psychologists. But the issue arises in how long we persist in our denial, and whether it becomes a crutch used to avoid properly facing and processing the source of our trauma. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Hellblade for me is the fact that it explores what a person who suffers from visions, hallucinations, and voice hearing might do with such a powerful yearning to deny reality and avoid that kind of pain. To build upon this concept, the source of Senua's mental illness is never explained, which is to be expected given the fact that the game is set on the Orkney Islands in the 8th century, when such things couldn't possibly be understood and were considered curses, witchcraft, or punishments from gods. Given the superstition of the time period, the frightening symptoms of the character's mental illness, and her unwillingness to accept the reality of her loss, what we have is a world created in the mind of Senua, one inspired by the Norse mythology taught to her by a mentor she encountered during her self-inflicted exile, and is made manifest by both her desire to avoid the truth and her deeply held belief in such superstitions. The quest she takes on as a result is not a pleasant experience. It's fraught with haunting images of her hallucinations, the persistent belittling of the voices in her head, and the constant reminder of the suffering, grief, and loss that Senua has been subject to all her life. The moment I knew the developers had created something special here was when I heard one of Senua's voices rush past my right ear, and I actually turned my head toward it. Generally, I consume media with a fairly strict analytical mind these days, and so I find it rare to be immersed in such a way. However, in this case, I felt tingles in my spine, similar, I think, to the kind that many people seek out with ASMR. It felt like I had people swimming in my own mind, and it was as wonderfully uncomfortable as it was enlightening. As a sound designer myself, I was incredibly impressed by the technical skill displayed by the team here. There's some text as you boot up the game that strongly advises that you play with headphones to receive the full impact of this effect, and I could not possibly recommend playing it any other way. It's just not the same. Equally impressive is the animation quality and performance from Melina Jurgens, the team's video editor who initially was only a stand-in for Senua during testing. However, after seeing her unique way of bringing life to the character during that process, Antoniades decided to cast her in the role, and even stated he didn't think it was necessary to teach her how to act, but rather to relive her internal pain, which was crucial to Hellblade's central theme. To give anything but praise would be doing her an injustice, and she deserves every accolade she has received for her portrayal as Senua. Very rarely have I seen anguish of this kind reenacted so believably, and while the techniques used to animate the character showcased groundbreaking work which should be applauded in its own right, the outcome was the creation of the tools necessary for us to see all the details of Jurgens' performance at her most raw, and the results are extremely powerful. This week, I was inspired by the story of Claire Wineland, a young woman who suffered all her life with cystic fibrosis, a terminal genetic disease. In this video, she explains how she spent at least a quarter of her life in hospitals, constantly fighting to overcome her maladies and live a more normal life. She also explains how doing so made her miserable, and that it was only after she accepted that this part of her reality was beyond her control that she learned to love her life, and chose to spend her time instead as an activist through her nonprofit organization seeking to help others suffering with chronic illnesses. She died only 3 weeks ago, at age 21. A tragically short life for such an indomitable spirit. But no one can say that such a life as she lived was a waste. She chose to spend her time helping and uplifting others despite her own incredible struggles, and left a mark on the world that each of us can learn from. Throughout the entire course of Hellblade, the player fights and strains, and most importantly resists alongside Senua through her grueling journey. After all the trials and challenges and horrific events we experience with her, it's unthinkable as you approach the final battle that you should give up on her crusade. What you come to realize, though, is that there isn't any other choice. It's precisely all that fighting and straining and resisting that is the cause of her prolonged pain, and the inevitable conclusion is that it's only through the acceptance of her loss, the reality and finality of it, that she can finally learn to live on and find peace in her heart and mind. And I love how that message is weaved into the final battle itself, where you simply cannot move forward until you accept defeat. In my own life, and in the lives of the people I've loved, I've seen this as being a universal truth. Rather than focusing all of our energy trying to fight and resist and change the things we can't control, it's always better to accept them and define for ourselves what it means to live, even if our lives won't be viewed as normal. Rather than wasting our time fighting what we cannot change, we should rather spend our lives relishing the time that is given to us and creating as many positive experiences as we can. Our time on Earth is short, and we can either waste it in defiance of the inevitable, or make the most of it with fruitful pursuits that are within our power to change. The choice is ours to make, but as Senua demonstrates, and more importantly, as Claire demonstrated, we can only find true peace through acceptance and proactive action. Thank you everybody for watching. Hellblade was my favorite game of 2017. I absolutely loved it, and definitely recommend it to any of you who are interested. Also, if you appreciate what we're doing here on the channel, please check out our Patreon page. As always, it's the funding from the fans that keeps the channel going.